Hello. Hello and welcome. Just gonna check that everyone can see and hear us okay. So if you are watching, please give us a few little hellos so we know we're reaching you. Fab. Oh, great. Okay, fantastic. So, hello and welcome to the third in our evolution of work webinars. Today, we're going to be diving into the exciting world of data in the HR and talent acquisition space, specifically looking at how to use data in a sort of humanized way to drive meaningful change in the workplace. I'm Ailish McLaughlin. I am the head of product at Flexa, and I have an academic background, so I'm a massive data geek at heart. So very excited to kind of dive into this subject with my guests today. And my guests are Debbie Fraser, who is the head of talent acquisition for EMEA at Boomi, and Alex Herr, the head of global employer brand at GoDaddy. And just to give you a bit more detail about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to dive into how we can really use data to improve processes and outcomes in HR, while also maintaining that sort of human touch that's really, really important in this sector. We'll be discussing how best to use data to make decisions and improve hiring processes, what challenges there are with collecting and accessing relevant data, and how to balance the new world of data and AI-driven decision-making with that kind of human touch that's needed to really do the job well. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit from the speakers. So Debbie, would you tell us a little bit about you, your role, and also just a bit about Boomi?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ailish. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. So my name is Debbie Fraser. I'm based in the UK and in Glasgow, just outside Glasgow in Scotland. First and foremost, I'm a mum of boys. So I've got two little boys and married to Craig. And I have been in the area of talent acquisition, recruitment, and all things hiring for about 20 years now. And in the last 8 years, for me, have specifically been working in tech. So thanks for having me on today. Currently, my current position is head of talent acquisition for the EMEA region for a company called Boomi. So Boomi is a data integration and data management and AI management platform. And in my role, I support all things hiring across our region. Something that I'm really passionate about is DE&I and working for a very inclusive employer. It's always something that I look out for, and I always like to talk about that. And I like to make sure that the companies that I work for walk the talk. And I feel it's my job to share that message with an external audience as well. Our values are be bold, be Boomi, be bold, be you, be Boomi. And I am being bold today by taking part in this webinar and pushing myself outside my comfort zone. Today, I just want to say as well, Ailish, all comments and opinions today are my personal opinions. Happy to share my experience of the industry. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Debbie. You wouldn't know that it's out of your comfort zone. Very well. Awesome, Alex. If you could give us a similar intro, that'd be great.
Yeah. Hi, Alex Herr. American accent here. I'm actually doing this live from the UK. So I head up global employer brand at GoDaddy. So all the time zones you could think of that falls under my remit. And for those who know of GoDaddy, I think historically we're known as a web hosting company, but it's more of it's a one-stop shop and solution for all small to mid-business entrepreneurs. We've jumped into the AI space, got some really great products there, but I think just good stuff to help you out. I'm a customer myself, also with co-founding the EB space, which is a employer branding community on Discord. So more about that later. But I've been in employer branding for about 7.5 years, and just honestly love anything and everything that goes around that. I know we're going to dive into a little bit of what makes my job special with the data metrics and all how that comes together. But just happy to be here and can't wait to get started.
Great, we're happy to have you. And just before we kick off with the first question, I just want to say, if you're watching, please feel free to stick some questions in the various chats as we go. We'll have some time at the end for questions. So if anything comes up, please feel free to put them in there, and then we can get into them at the end. So Alex, I'd like to start with you really, and just kind of if you could give me a bit of an overview and tell me a bit about how you are using data to make decisions around employer brand and kind of workplace changes. Oh, we've lost you sound. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, that's the line of the pandemic, right? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to workplace changes, we use data to identify just different trends, assess the impacts that it's having, on us, our team, our locations, individuals, predict outcomes. And with that, we just gather data from various sources, annual surveys, which are key ones. Hey, Glassdoor is also a good one to look at too as well. People can love or hate them, but they do provide free data if you're paying for that or not, or if it's just free. And also just by doing that, we just uncover, okay, how are people really feeling, identify areas of opportunity, and just see, okay, how can that help us reach our goals? Are we providing the proper work-life balance? And then when it comes to the employer brand, there is a lot there when it comes to data. I know everyone gets lost in the vanity metrics, impressions, clicks. It doesn't mean a whole lot to leadership, to be honest. It's okay, what are we doing with the data, right? Are we actually getting butts and seats? Are we lowering time to hire, time to fill? Is that resulting in more projects that are being worked on, right? Are we not stalling things? Are we actually putting, are we making money? That's really what matters, right? It's great. It's cool to do the fluffy stuff, but there's more that matters. Also, are we getting diversity with the locations that we're targeting, right? If we say we're truly about diversity and global reach, where we're reaching, are we actually getting there? Or are we just stuck with traffic in the UK, the US? Maybe it's not where we want to be. And most importantly, if we're going after gender diversity, are we truly getting, we want to get more, say, for example, more females in tech. Are we doing that? Or are we just checking off a box and we actually can't, quantify that and show something? So there's a lot that can be taken into account. More time than we have now, but it definitely plays a factor in what we do on the employer brand side.
Awesome. Yeah. So kind of it's quite far reaching, isn't it, in terms of like understanding how what you're offering is impacting employees, and then also just from that kind of branding perspective. And I think we'll probably dive into that a bit later, but I think you have got a sort of marketing background, which is really interesting from the employer brand side of things as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Awesome. And Debbie, I know from a talent acquisition perspective, from your point of view, it'd be really interesting to hear a bit about how you guys are using data as well.
Okay, so data underpins everything we do in talent acquisition. So I think in 2024, talent acquisition organizations are challenged to do more with less. So how do we do more with less? We have to lean on the tools and the data that's at our disposal to really help us drive efficiency and increase quality for all of our, for everyone who's involved in the hiring experience. So that's applicants and candidates, hiring managers, hiring teams, and the recruitment team as well. So when I look at the tech stack that we have now at Boomi, I would say that there's an AI element to, or AI functionality to, a lot of the tools that we're using, and that is, it's important that we are the human driving the activity, and that we recognise that we have these tools at our disposal to help us do our jobs in a more efficient manner. But it's very important as well to be using these tools responsibly and in line with the recent EU AI Act. And something else that we should be really aware of is that, of course, we have human bias. If we have human bias, then we have AI bias. So it's real. A big challenge that we have just now in the kind of TA world is that the volume of AI generated applications that we receive is huge. So we need these tools to help us, and we need to look at the data to help us manage that volume, and ensure that we give every single person who applies to our organization the due consideration, and that really evaluate every single application, and that we get the best out of our process. An example of that would be, we use, for example, there's a tool called BrightHire that we use, Ailish, that helps us really, it helps the recruiters on our team really work a lot faster. So as we move more to skills-based hiring, for example, the tool BrightHire, for our recruiters, when they are now doing the interviews, the AI note taker pops up, transcribes all of the call, and then will also categorize all of the answers of the candidate, and put them into buckets in relation to the competencies and the skills that we're interviewing for, and it does it in seconds. So it's just a complete game changer. Gone are the days of the recruiter, typing away, taking the notes, thinking, how does that relate to my competencies? So the AI tool takes the the hard work out of it, and but captures all of the data, and really would capture more data than probably the human could have recalled. But as the recruiter, you're always kind of looking at that, editing. You just use it to edit the notes and then send it on to the hiring teams. So then there was something else I wanted to mention as well, and then you've got the more traditional kind of ways of data gathering, such as your surveys, your employee pulse surveys. We lean on the Flexa survey results as well, of course. So we took part in the Flexa survey last year, and also we took part in the survey this year, and that's where all of our employees were surveyed to find out how do they feel about Boomi. Are we a truly flexible employer? And it's not just about the tangible benefits, it's about the work environment. Do they have autonomy to do the role, and how do they feel about all of that? And I'm pleased to say that we've rated really highly again. So we use those survey results as well to inform our decisions.
Amazing. And you kind of mentioned it there, around it kind of generates more data than than a human would per se. And Alex, you kind of alluded to it there as well. Like there's lots of data that's collecting, and like, I suppose, how do we know what what are the pros and cons of all of the data we collect, and how do we kind of know which to kind of lean on? Because I think the more data, as you become kind of more data focused, you start collecting more and more data.
Yeah.
But more data isn't always necessarily better. So how do you kind of dig in and, I guess, kind of find the more meaningful and useful data that you collect, and really kind of get the most out of it?
Well, I think all of the call is transcribed within seconds. So then that gives the recruiter time in that situation to scan through the information, ensure that the AI has done its job in terms of moving the correct example into the right area of competency and skill. So that's where you could never operate a business and leave a tool to do this job. You need a human to oversee the data, and there's errors throughout, people's accents and different natural errors that happens. But yeah, so it's down to the expertise of the individual who is the subject matter expert to ensure that the data is relevant to the job that we're hiring for. So in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, would you add anything on that? Like, how do you kind of find and get the most useful data when you have a growing sort of pool of it?
Yeah. The approach I think that was taught to me by some good leaders is that data relevant to like higher ups, the CEO? If it matters to them, right? Can we talk about that, right? Can we succinctly talk about that and say, this is why you should read this? It matters. We can talk about where eventually this is going to bench, how the impact of the overall business. If we can do that, I think it's relevant. I'm not saying all data is not relevant, right? Like you said, I think it's amazing to have that problem, to have too much data, because in most cases we don't have enough. But I think when you're looking at what's most important to share outside of your team or individual leadership, I think it has to be something that can go all the way to the top, and that's some important data you should keep there, keep tracking MBRs, QBRs, whatever you need to be doing. But I think that's a probably a good guiding principle when it comes to the data.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I know, not related to HR at all, but my PhD was in exercise physiology, and sports typically don't have a lot of data, or didn't used to. And then as my PhD was all about collecting data, and then we had the same problem of like, we have all this data, what are we going to do with it? How do we make sense of it? So I think that is kind of a natural evolution. But as you said, a kind of a good problem to have. I'd love to talk then a little bit more around, I guess, the challenges, particularly collecting data in general, but particularly around collecting sort of personal information from candidates and employees, and sort of how do you manage that? Debbie, it'd be good to hear what your thoughts are on that.
So on that one, I would say that the first and foremost for us, teams and organizations in Europe, GDPR is number one. So we have to ensure that we're GDPR compliant, of course, and we have, our GDPR statement and controls built into our ATS. So we use an ATS called Greenhouse, and we build those GDPR controls to ensure that we are managing any personal data correctly in accordance with the law. So, and does that answer your question, Ailish?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, I suppose there's the collection and storing of data. And then I think there's the other side around how do you actually get data from people, because people I think are generally quite sensitive about giving personal information, particularly in a scenario where there might be a sort of bias around any data that they may provide. So yeah, I don't know if you've any sort of additional thoughts on that.
I think that we do find that people, applicants generally will be reticent to share, certain elements of data, maybe disclosing race or ethnicity or veteran status, or with disabilities as well. And unfortunately, that's due to fear of discrimination. I think my advice would be to certainly disclose that to any special adaptations that you would require, or any accommodations that you would like to have during the interview process. I think any responsible employer would be very, very grateful to hear about that, because the job of the TA team is to ensure that our candidates have the most comfortable experience when they're engaging with us. So so any responsible employer is going to welcome an individual disclosing that, so that we can ensure that you have the best experience. So and a big part of the reason, again, that this has all come about, this webinar today, because of our partnership with Flexa, and what we have found as well is that the Flexa audience has over 3 million users, and it's richly diverse. So I think I had written down some notes. So there was 72% female, 31% from an ethnic background, 25% LGBTQ+, 19% identify with a disability, 27% neurodivergent. Ailish, so you can correct me if I've got that wrong. I think I got that from you guys.
Yeah.
But that means that when we think about our employer branding, we know that we can tap into a richly diverse audience if we can promote careers with Boomi, on the Flexa platform, and if we can kind of showcase our inclusivity practices and just our culture, if we can showcase that, then we know we're connecting with that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. You've done my job for me there, Debbie. I don't need to say anything else. That was great. But Alex, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And particularly, I think just, obviously there is an element of kind of maybe mistrust, or people don't want to give information, and sort of like where does that come from, and have you any thoughts on how to kind of overcome that side of things?
Yeah. So I think there's two key factors at play. It's like there's ways that we can get the data and control that we control, right? But there's a lot of factors outside of that when it comes to data that we all love. When it comes to EBTA, DEIB, that we use second, third party platforms, right, that are out of our control. And I think when it comes to like what we can control and where we can actually see what matters, and it matters a lot to me with being an employer branding, because a lot of what we do has been around a long time, but it's still quite new. And it's a lot of like, okay, you've got to, really show, like kind of vindicate yourself to leadership and say, this is why it's important, right? This is why it should matter. So I'm always looking for different ways to do that. But we only have a couple fronts where we get that, where we control that. We're okay. I'm not going to dive too much into GDPR, but, Debbie hit the nail on the head with that, because, I was probably my second, third year in the space when that happened. So it changed things dramatically. And then you have here in the States, each individual state had their own privacy laws. So then you add, brick on brick on brick, and it gets a little more difficult to get that information. But your career page is, career page or CRM/talent community is where you have you're politely open up and say, hey, we're kind of looking for this, and this is why we're doing that. Application self-explanatory, and then from there, it's when individuals will do a post-interview survey, where it's another great way to get some data that there's really no need for them to do that, but maybe you've done your part to keep them part of the process, and they like that, right? Or you maybe give them a gift card, which companies have done. But where it gets very difficult is, okay, I may get all the information I need from running campaigns on Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and that's phenomenal. Maybe Glassdoor gives me that. But if I run campaigns on Google, I don't get the diversity metrics I'm looking for, right? So then I'm kind of I'm at their beck and call with, okay, they only give me 5 out of 6 things I want. So I've got to take all those different sources, that data. Hopefully that works, and hopefully that will give me enough to, share a story with somebody. But I think it's always difficult, because one comes to consent, then the multiple platforms, and then if you're working across a CRM, ATS, everything else in between, getting the consent to move that across the different platforms to bring that all together. Because I think the one thing we forget is, there's GDPR, there's different privacy laws and regulations in each state, country, geographic region, but you still got to get the permission to move them from one platform to the other, which is another huge hurdle that most don't consider.
Yeah. So difficult, isn't it? To kind of like, I think it's quite chicken and egg, really, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you want to improve diversity, and in order to do that, you need to get information and collect data around it. But then people don't want to disclose it because they're worried about different elements. So I think that makes it really tricky. And I think this is one area where kind of using sort of third party providers, a bit like you've mentioned, Alex, with kind of Meta and different things like that, and Debbie, as you mentioned, on Flexa, it can be really helpful, because, so for example, at Flexa, we have an 87% response rate when it comes to collecting diversity information, and it's because we are one step removed, right? So there's no kind of fear that that's going to be used as a sort of a source of kind of can't think of the word, but bias ultimately in terms of getting a job or something like that. So I think that can be a useful tactic as well, is to really lean into providers which can help. But as you mentioned, Alex, then you have the additional problem of how do you kind of bring all of that together and make sense of the data, and even the kind of legal challenges around doing those things make it super tricky. Cool. And then I think like it would be interesting to kind of dive a bit more into specifics around kind of metrics that you guys collect. So Alex, I might start with you from the point of view of employer brand and that side of things. Like what metrics do you find most useful? What do you kind of really lean into? What do you get the most value from?
Yeah, so I don't want to discount some of the like entry-level vanity metrics that matter to employer brand. If you're take this for what it is, but I would say on a more mature level, like I'm staying away from impressions and clicks. That doesn't do much for me or my leadership where we're at. But I'm looking more, okay, how does the work I do tie into the time to hire, right? Am I making it, or me and my team making a significant impact on that? Can we truly show that our brand is that strong, where we're impacting that? The quality of the hire, are we getting from proper quality sources? Sure, are we investing in the right spots? Are we wasting time? Those are questions to have, and we get that from that metric. As well as NPS scores, something phenomenal that we do with our candidate experience team to understand, okay, is everything working? We're doing a great job, or are we doing a bad job? We need to know that, right? We have to be transparent. And then that flows into post-interview surveys, feedbacks. I think other ones that are really key is, okay, referrals and retention. Because if we got a strong brand, people are referring people, they're staying. If we have if we got a pretty shitty brand and we're not doing a good job as a leadership team, people will be leaving, right? You don't refer people when you want to leave a company. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then getting away from the traditional measurements. I look a lot at, and I don't think it's being talked about enough, I look at the Google Analytics via our career page, because a lot can be told, okay, if I'm wasting a lot of money and it's not working, I can see the traffic there with the analytics. However, if the brand is working, our content marketing's in place, and we have ambassadors via our recruiters, hiring managers, everyone else in between, and people are naturally going there, we should see a lot of organic traffic that is going to our different pages via Google Analytics. And to me, that's a story I can bring to leadership and say, listen, the work we've been doing is working. It's truly in effect. We're not reliant on LinkedIn or Indeed as much, or these other local job boards. This is what's truly driving us. And these 5 or 6 things we're doing here for the quarter or for the year truly has an impact. But that's just a bit of that. And apologies, Debbie. I know I sit within TA, so we kind of weave into some of your metrics. So I hope there's nothing that I took away that you were going to share as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. And as I mentioned earlier, coming from a marketing background, obviously you're always thinking from that perspective. And at Flexa, that's always been something that we really try and focus on. And that there's a hiring funnel, right, when it starts from application and beyond. But actually, in terms of improving that funnel, you have to look much wider. So you're looking at who knows about you as an employer of choice, and then how are they interested? Do they engage, and how it funnels down. And I'd love to, Alex, just to before I move on to you, Debbie, from a bit more of the TA perspective, I'd love to. You mentioned there around really being focused on kind of the more traditional, I guess, like HR metrics around time to hire and quality of hire. But is there a way that you track the impact of your kind of employer brand work and how it funnels down and impacts those more on the ground metrics, for want of a better word?
Yeah, we're working side by side, hand by hand, hand to hand, whatever you want to call it, all the cliche terms, with my recruiting teammates and managers, right? Because we're making sure we're blending in the employer brand in any sort of way we can get tracking, because tracking is always a problem when it comes to the space. To see, okay, where are we hitting the mark? Where is the work that we're doing actually impact that calls you to do something, calls you to actually be here, apply for the job. And then working to see, okay, based off of what we did together as a entire TA team, did we knock down the time to hire? Can we truly say it was from the work we've done, or was it just, hey, dumb luck, and we dealt with the great resignation, or whatever it is now, and people have just been looking for jobs in that region. So tying that together, because I can't say it's all from us, right? It is a joint effort, but it is working side by side to ensure, okay, hey, let's make sure we can attribute the work to what we're doing. Is that impacting your OKRs, your goals for the year, the quarter, and that's helped us out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good, an important point, in that it's not separate parts kind of functioning in silo and then hoping that everything will work better. There's a real importance for kind of collaboration and all the different sides of things feeding into each other. Debbie, from a talent acquisition perspective, what are you finding sort of most valuable metrics wise?
Okay, so it is, we still look at all the traditional TA metrics like you've touched on, Alex, there. So your time to hire, that's what the ELT want to hear about. What was the time to hire? We're a software company, we move fast. So that's really, really important. But we use now data. We're actually in the early stages of we're trying to develop a more predictable forecasting model within our talent acquisition function of how do we improve that time, time to hire, and how do we improve other objectives like quality of hire as well? It's much more difficult to measure. But when we look at that, we take a step back. So we're kind of in the early phases right now of developing a model whereby we start to let's categorize our jobs, and let's look at each individual job and give it ultimately a difficulty rating in terms of the time it takes to recruit for that specific role. And that allows us to get more sophisticated in our TA capacity planning. So we know and we can get ahead. So if we get our AOP from the business and we look at, what we're going to have to hire next year, we can then, take a look at that and kind of predict and forecast and say, okay, those roles are a 3, those roles are a 2, those roles are a 1. And it helps us with our resource planning internally as well. And something else that we're kind of we are working on just now as well is developing a very strong talent architecture in terms of having a global competency framework, tying those competencies to the profiles. Then we're using tools, including AI tools, to enhance the interviews, to measure that interview data, and then hopefully again it's future state, but we want to connect that to on the job performance. And something else in addition to the traditional metrics that we've talked about. So other things that we do measure, of course, are our candidate engagement surveys. Every time someone leaves our hiring process in terms of a candidate, they'll get a survey. We also have TA performance surveys. So when a hiring manager closes a process, they get a survey. How did the process go? How was the recruiter? And we really break that down to understand where were the blockers in terms of time to fill. And then we also, of course, look at our employee pulse surveys. And other indicators are ERG participation rates. So we have employee resource groups. So again, that's a good indicator of the sentiment of the people in your organization, of your participation, of people volunteering to take part in these kind of groups. But something else that you've touched on there, Alex, is the employee advocacy piece as well. That's something that we're really focusing on as we look at our employer branding in the coming year. How can we drive up our employee advocacy when they're having a good time? How can we encourage them to organically share more of the good stories? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned kind of, and I think it's really interesting. I come from an academic background, and then now I work in product, and so everything is really data focused, and always trying to kind of balance the art and the sort of science side of things as I go. And I think for a lot of people in the talent or HR or EB space, there is a lack of kind of maybe confidence around data and stuff like that. So it's really impressive to hear kind of both of your different examples around using more kind of formalized structures to kind of really try and build frameworks around embedding data in your decision making and things like that. And Debbie, you've obviously mentioned a couple of really interesting structures there around like the difficulty profile and the talent architecture, I think you called it. What are some of the kind of biggest, I guess, impacts you've seen of implementing these things?
Well, it's about a big kind of byproduct of it is eliminating bias as well. So what's fantastic to do now is within our interview process. So, before we had recorded interviews, then we were very much relying on a hiring manager's feedback and the candidate's feedback and the recruiter's recollection and feedback. And now we can actually go and check how that interview went, and we can say, because we're humans at the end of the day, we mishear things, we forget things, we have our own bias. So it's a great way to check, I had an example recently of a hiring manager saying, hey, well, this person really wasn't concerned about their place on the leaderboard, in their current organization. It was for a sales role. And when we went back to check the call, the person actually said, we don't have a leaderboard. But if I was on it, maybe I would be there. And so there was just a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just fact checking the feedback as we go as well. So it really does improve the quality of our hiring process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. And I know, Alex, you sort of mentioned around I think you've both talked a bit about the sort of employee surveys and the importance of that. And it would be interesting, Alex, if you had any examples of how you've maybe used data around, and maybe this is a bit less your kind of cup of tea, so feel free to let me know. But to sort of improve the employee well-being or work-life balance side of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, so I would say when it comes to like well-being, that goes to our L&D team. I don't want to say my own name there, but where it's helped us out is to see, okay, was it worth the investment? For example, we had started a GoDaddy Life blog, which is basically focused on the employer brand side. And honestly, you get some views, impressions. You're not really sure if that matters or not, if people are actually looking at it. But seeing that, okay, hey, you get from the post exit or post interview surveys that like there's free space, right? And they don't have to do this, but we had several people just call out and say, hey, listen, because of this interview with so and so off the GoDaddy Life blog, I applied for that, or I saw this person actually post advocates, as Debbie mentioned, which I completely missed that in my metrics there, but we have a lot of employee ambassadors, and they were mentioning, okay, so and so posted this, and I applied for that one reason alone. And those are just like, they're not really, it's more qualitative, not quantitative, but you get in that and it's like, okay, that tells me, all right, we're on to something. And it does matter, but the work-life balance stuff does go to a different team. And we definitely do look at that. I can say I've been part of, various projects in my short time here at GoDaddy where we've action on that. And I'm proud to say that we actually do that as a company versus taking any sort of responses, whether it be internal, external, not doing much with it. It's been a different experience, but that's where I can speak to that. I'll defer to you or Debbie on the rest of it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think it's so true, and you've mentioned this a couple of times already. But one of the biggest representations of employer brand is how a current employee's experience, right? Because they're going to be the ones talking about it, and also can contribute to that kind of employer brand advocacy. So I think it's so intertwined, the whole process, and it's very difficult to kind of remove those things. And Debbie, have you got any kind of thoughts on that from the perspective of trying to understand employee experience and then using data to kind of improve on that?
Yes, I've got an example of that. So we have one of the major things we launched this year actually at Boomi was flexible time off program globally. So that means that as an overlay benefit to your time off and your contract that you have in each of the countries that you work in at Boomi, you get a really flexible time off policy, which means that you hadn't booked it, but you're really feeling, you've done loads of hours this week and you really want to have next Friday off. You speak to your manager and it's arranged. Or you want that, that big holiday and it's going to take even more than you would have in your traditional holiday allowance. You can just speak to your manager and book that in. So that additional very flexible benefit was decided based on feedback surveys that we had from our employee pulse surveys, from Flexa as well, to understand what are the things that are most important to our people. So that was a great thing that we managed to launch this year. But there was another example as well, which is so we were launching in a new country, and we were hiring, multiple hires. And what we were beginning to see was that the data that my system was telling me in the ATS actually, and just from running reports, was kind of flagging that the male candidates who were applying for those roles were requesting higher compensation than the female candidates. So it kind of flagged a bit of a trend. So in that situation, so it was really quite interesting. So we'd actually kind of launched the project. We had kind of created a couple of offers for that specific role. And it just so happened the first offers were to male candidates. So then when the female candidates came along and were asking for expecting a little less, we were able to say, well, hang on a minute, no, we need to have an equitable hiring practice. And we were able to make sure that we were leveling the offers so that they were correct for everyone across the board. So
yeah, that's awesome. Really, really, really interesting behavioral element there, and amazing that you could kind of see that and then correct for it appropriately as using that data. So really, really interesting. I'm very conscious of time, and we've got a bunch of questions, so I don't want to miss those. So I'm just going to kind of go in with the last couple here, and I this there mightn't be that much here, but I've always been struck since working in Flexa and kind of starting to learn about the HR and the talent world and really dive into that about how we've touched on already sometimes how difficult it is to access data. I remember speaking to a woman who is sort of head of HR of like a huge consultancy firm, and she was asking me what the general uptake of part-time work was, because even though they offered part-time within their organization, she couldn't access that data. And so I think it's really interesting, and because of all of the reasons that we've discussed, it just can be really hard to get the data that you need to kind of really do your job. And I was just wondering, are there any particular areas where it's kind of hard to access data to facilitate decisions or measure progress or anything like that? Debbie, that's a one for you there.
In terms of hard to access data, for us, it's like, I think from speaking to other people in the kind of TA community as well, I think it's, and the HR community, it's the quality of hire is an area that we would love to really be able to nail. And I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think it doesn't, of course, sit just with talent acquisition. That's the beginning of the process. And there are a lot of other factors that are going to impact that individual's experience with the organization and how they thrive within the organization. So I think that is that's one area that we would love to get better at ultimately. But I think it's quite common actually for a lot of organizations to be trying to achieve indicators of a better quality of hire, and what does that mean? And then it's a huge piece of work. It starts defining what is quality of hire.
Exactly.
We measure it. So.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say I've spoken to many different kind of HR leaders, and everyone I think has the same challenge over quality of hire and measures it differently. So I think it really is a challenge. Alex, would you have anything to add around, like, in terms of particularly around the employer brand space, anywhere where it's difficult to get the data that would kind of help make your job a bit easier?
Yeah, I think tracking the source of applicant and hire is always difficult because you have a lot of different companies and teams who are you work with these ATSs that may have like a career page, like a bundle type of package, or you have a vendor that runs the career page and an ATS, Greenhouse, Smart Recruiters, whatever, and they don't always connect, right? So you always send people to the career page, and unless your application's embedded or you have proper UTM tracking, you can't follow them through. So I can say you went there, but outside that, that's all I can really glean on. We were able to fix that with our recent change to a new vendor. However, that is one issue that I think always impacts things. The other is, I know we talked about data before, and I I neglected to mention that, we had used our data to actually switch up how we work at GoDaddy. Well, the problem with that is it's great. So we took more of a hybrid remote approach, but what you don't get from that is okay. And I know you spoke a little bit about part-time work. We didn't, you can't really, unless people give that feedback at a event or interview, you don't know if they want part-time work. So
Yeah.
we actually were given that the great tidbit of the information at some events in Nottingham. So Nottingham, via the UK job fairs, finding out from working moms that, okay, hey, they like part-time work, right? Why don't you offer more of that? Not something you can necessarily get data from because it's more voluntary than anything.
Yeah.
And then the other is with us going to more remote hybrid approach, which is great. I work remote, right? But engineers, we assume that they are part of the remote train, and it could be further from the truth. Hearing through hiring managers and recruiters, they want to be in the office. They want to have that camaraderie to be together as a team. And unless you're asking that in an interview or if they back out of the process, you can't get that elsewhere, right? Because there's really no questions on the application that says, would you rather, work here or there? They typically ask you, would you relocate or not? There's nothing else. So
Yeah.
I think those are two key things that definitely have made a difference for us. And I'm sure that there's got to be much more out there that we haven't considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point there around data around how people want to work, something that we've been collecting on Flexa since inception, and it's been really interesting. Say the data around working mothers, for example. Typically, people are expecting that they all want to work remotely, but actually, like 60+% of them really want some form of hybrid because they have an additional job at home, and so it's really helpful for them to be able to go into the office a bit more. And so, I think, just having that information is really helpful to kind of make decisions and help companies really stand out and attract the right kind of talent, which is really important. Last little question before we dive into some of the questions from listeners. Kind of the whole goal of this webinar has been talked about data, but to really come back to the kind of human side of it. This is human resources and it is like the people space, and it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. So Alex, how do you balance that kind of being data driven from a decision making perspective, but also the need to really consider that human element in the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I think it's definitely a tough one now, right? There's a lot of data we have access to. GPT, Gemini, Claude. There's so much that you can glean on, right? But we use the data to a certain part, right? We want to make sure we're the custodians of that data, that it helps us to drive data-driven decisions without removing the human element. Because I think if we're just simply relying on that, because with a lot of the data we're getting, the AI we're getting, it's trained by us, right? So it's only as good as the information we're putting in. But we want to make sure that we use it to a certain extent, but also use it to just make the best decisions possible, but also leading efficient and empathetically. But we don't want the data to just simply override everything. I know you talked a little bit about sports earlier, and I think that's probably the best example, because a lot of the classic sports that we love, football here, since we're in the UK, I think the analytics are good, but it doesn't. There are just certain elements where the data analytics cannot replace, like a good footballer, right? Like a proper footballer is. It doesn't matter. You could have Pep system at City or whatever, but that person is just going to smash the records. You can't predict what they're going to do. But I think there's got to be a balance, nevertheless.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important, and data is so helpful for decisions, but ultimately you have to look at it as a human and pick up on the things that maybe the numbers miss out, and it's getting that balance is really important. Debbie, what are your thoughts, and what is your approach to kind of getting the balance?
I think that we're a people function first and foremost, and I think that we can use data to help us inform our decision-making process, and we can use the tools will evolve. But at the end of the day, when I look at my function, talent acquisition, we are hiring individuals, and I firmly believe that people will make a decision about whether to join a company or not and accept that offer based on the relationship that they have formed with the hiring team in the short time that they've been engaging with the company. So I just think that it's that people and human element that's really the most important thing in that scenario. And it also impacts, their approach perhaps to negotiating, on the offer. And so I think, yeah. And I think also when we look at the EU AI Act as well, baked into that, the first principle of that states that AI systems should be overseen by people, and that's the most important thing. I think we just need to remember that humans have bias, therefore, as we've said, AI has bias. So it's just our job to work ethically with the evolving tools at our disposal, just to achieve the best outcome for our business, which means hiring the best talent at our companies so that we can serve our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so really important. And I think the thing is, having these kind of conversations, really bearing these things in mind at the beginning from the outset. Because once you've got that kind of lens and you keep it in view, then you can get the best of both worlds and kind of manage those things. Conscious of time, I'm going to dive into a few listener questions. Just before I do, Melissa was asking the name of the AI note-taking tool, and is that BrightHire?
BrightHire, yeah.
Perfect. So we've got that one boxed off. So we have a LinkedIn user who's asked the question, there are lots of people who don't feel confident dealing with data. Have you got any tips on how they can start to get used to using it before kind of getting the benefits? But, as we said, the kind of data literacy, obviously, it's not a requirement to be part of a talent team or an employer branding team or a HR team. Any tips on how to upskill and kind of get a bit more comfortable with that? Debbie, I'll go to you first.
Upskilling on data?
Yeah, and just feeling comfortable sort of using it.
Okay, and is this from a TA perspective, do we think?
Yeah, let's go from a TA perspective.
Okay, so I just think the more you can inform yourself about your business, the better. And we just have to keep our eyes open and listen to all of the feedback that we get through all of the channels, and just use that information to the best of our ability. So and don't rely too much on the AI recommendations for things, but yes, we can use it for shortcuts and to do things a little bit quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, with your kind of background from a marketing perspective, I know you will have been data heavy for a long time. Do you have any kind of tips on getting a bit more used to it and upskilling?
Yeah, I think data is like public speaking. I mean, you always get the butterflies in your stomach, right? It's scary because it's got to be impactful, right? If you're throwing numbers out there, you better have a story to tell with that. But I think to what Debbie was saying is, don't rely on AI too much. But what you can do, I've been diving into it as much as I can, probably too much. There are a lot of good prompts out there where you can say, hey, like, help me understand, why does 2% month over month with this? Why does that matter? And look at your GPT this way. Okay, let's say if Debbie and Ailish are my coworkers and I can't get a hold of them, it's kind of replaces, like, it gives you another person, like, another set of eyes, another person to just say, hey, can you be my buddy, companion, and let me run this by you, like, kind of dumb it down for me. And if you get very specific with your prompt, it will do that. And I've had many times where I've had either different data or different things that like been thrown my way, and you put it inside of the GPT with the prompt, and it makes it easier. I would have never looked at it that way, but it's a quick free option that is out there for all of us to use at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. And just it's practice, really, isn't it? As you said about the public speaking thing, like, you're not going to get better at understanding data until you start trying to use it, and kind of have to bite the bullet and put yourself out there a little bit.
Agreed.
And Alex, how would you go about sort of using data to demonstrate the value of the kind of work that you're doing to the C-suite, I suppose? So like your kind of the value of the work that you're doing using data to demonstrate that.
Yeah, the impact, I guess, if your goal for the year is, okay, we want to We want to, grow our female in tech audience. What are we doing? Are we okay? Are we producing 3 or 4 blogs a month along with spotlight videos that hit that? And then dive into the data, because we're talking about data here behind on each platform natively. Are we reaching a predominant female audience in, let's say, EMEA, APAC, US? And are they watching the video all the way through? Video completion rate, if they're going all the way to 60%, if it's all female, we got something good there, right? Or if we have 1 million TikTok views, all right, we're onto something that's great. That's significant to show the leadership. But if we say, okay, we've got 1,000 impressions, anybody can give, like, I can give you 1,000 impressions right now. That's
Yeah.
that's how I think significant. But I think really like it can be difficult, but make it, dumb it down if anything, to see, okay, how much, like, why is this important? Why should I share this with leadership? And if you can have that number that you say, okay, let's say probably the easiest one anyone can do is you have a CTR, your completion rate. Look at that, and all right, the average is, I think, 0.48. If you're getting a 3%, that's good.
Yeah.
Why is that good though? So the context, the driver, and the measure behind that, and that's going to help you succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really nice way of framing it, because you're right, like numbers on their own potentially mean nothing. So you have to be able to kind of show why it matters and how it matters to something that they care about as well, which is really helpful. Graham says, for Debbie specifically, what's the ratio of candidates who decided to opt in versus opt out for AI? And do you or BrightHire inform candidates on how the AI was trained? Because I think he's saying some AI hiring tools can unintentionally discriminate against others. So curious to hear your thoughts.
So yes, there is BrightHire will inform the candidate on that, and I don't know the ratios off the top of my head, but just from from using the tool, I know that the dropout rate is not high. So most people opt in, I would say.
Yeah, awesome. That's amazing. Really helpful to hear that. And then last couple of questions, I think. One from Melissa, and we'll put it to you both. Do you think the amount of data around how people want to work will grow over the next few years? She says, I'm assuming it wasn't as relevant prior to 2020. So what do you think about the kind of journey of data and how they want to work and how important that will be? Go with you, Debbie, first.
Okay, so if I'm interpreting that question, it's how the data on how people will want to work.
Yeah.
Does that mean in terms of their working environment?
That's the way I'm interpreting it as well.
Okay, so I would say, from the research that we have done, and the indicators will tell us that the next generation, the Gen Z coming through, really do value, having a more flexible working arrangement, maybe hybrid, or having that ability to work from home is very important. And that's really insightful for us to be aware of that, so that we can bake that into the working environments that we offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you add anything to that, Alex?
Yeah, I think definitely the Gen Z, Gen Z is a good call out. I would say on top of that, we realistically have maybe just over close to 2 years worth of data with the whole remote in-office hybrid, because we were just getting out of COVID. I think the other factor that comes into play is, without diving into which country or which government or anything, but let's say, leadership changes happen, and maybe there's rights that don't favor you as one specific gender versus the other. You may want to be more remote, maybe remote in a different country. There's a lot that could be out there that I think it's going to really reshape the way that we're looking at things. But I think there's so much more, and honestly, data-wise, we can only go up from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important and interesting. You mentioned the kind of Gen Z thing as well, because that we're definitely seeing in the data we collect a real difference in what they're looking for in their work environment. One thing I was looking at today is that twice as many Gen Zs prioritize diversity in the work environment than millennials, for example. And these are all things that I think are becoming more pertinent and prominent in and important for you guys guys to kind of work with and understand. So that's it. That's time. This has been absolutely amazing and a really insightful discussion. And I want to thank you, Debbie and Alex, so much for your time. It's been really, really useful, and yeah, great to chat. And I hope everyone listening has enjoyed hearing kind of Debbie's and Alex's point of view on using data and how to get the most out of it in this data-driven world. So thanks so much for listening, guys, and hope to see